This one's a TDS600B oscilloscope, and looks like it's a strong enough box, but it's been beat up a little bit, and the box itself is physically not much larger than the scope itself. That's kind of a bad sign. Flops around when I roll it like that. That's not a good sign. Some bottom damage. This particular type of scope isn't that subject to damage and shipping unless it's dropped really hard, and sometimes the acquisition system can see some damage because of that. It's also packing job, and his feedback actually reflects that fact. I think he's at like 98 right now. But it's a parts machine. The price was right, and there'll be some salvageable parts no matter what on it. Check out what's under the top of this thing. I don't know, 2.5 inches of empty space, so this thing can flop up and down. That's pretty pathetic. You can see that the front panel controls and digging into this foam here. You should always have at least bubble wrap there, something to keep them from directly. A lot of times it'll break these silicone controls right off. They'll just snap. Packaged upside down, which on like a CSA 8000 that might be a good idea, but on a scope like this, yeah, it's probably not a good idea. He's missing feet, etc. Oh look, it came from NASA. Also, these things generate static, this popcorn. You really don't want them up against your BNCs. Some up there. I'm sure there's other problems with this scope. This guy has pretty flaky feedback, and so you can see why. He did place a couple of extra pieces of box. I guess to cushion the blow, or he had some extra box laying around that he wanted to throw away. My expense. Pretty marginal. One of the BNCs, probably can't see it with the focus on this thing, but one of the BNCs on it is definitely damaged. All these controls look okay. See, the handle's been removed before. You can tell right there. Usually the first couple of times you do that, you're not very good at it. This is a little doohickey to hold the power cord in. All you have to do is, I forget, you just rotate it and it comes out, but most people aren't smart enough to know that, and they just cut them if they've never worked with them before. What a waste. No obvious signs of being dropped back there. It's a parts machine. I've tried before to send sellers, tips on how to package this stuff, so that one, they don't have to use a giant box and spend a fortune to ship it to me, and two, to protect my investment. But usually it just insults them. So. But again, I don't really like to leave negative feedback, because this guy may have other stuff, but on the other hand, I don't really want to be receiving stuff that doesn't have any parts left in it, because they've all been busted. So this one cosmetically is in okay state. It's pretty tough to replace those BNCs though. They're installed pretty tightly at the factory. You have to take a bunch of stuff out and pull them apart, or just use a new BNC carrier. Install that on the acquisition board. So I probably won't leave them negative feedback, but I'll certainly mention that it wasn't a very good packing job, and that there was unmentioned damage, and that I didn't pay a penny more than I should have for certain. Check it out. While getting rid of the box, I noticed that's a foot imprint on the top of the box. You know how hard you have to hit the top of the box to make a foot imprint like that? The whole point of packaging is to keep, or at least when you're working with test gear, the whole point of packaging is to keep your test gear from touching the outside world. And that foot definitely touched the outside of the world. It smashed its way into that. And of course, that means that the whole scope took that kind of a blow. And that's because this guy, all of his effort was on the bottom. You have the scope in the box upside down and about a 2-inch air gap on the top. Things just go up and down through transit. You see that too when you have like a big, heavy box, a test instrument inside of a box with a whole bunch of this popcorn. It's kind of like shipping a brick. The brick starts out in the middle of the box and gradually takes a nosedive, crashes in somewhere, and then it gets set down hard one time. In this case right there, all the weight of the scope was sitting right there. And probably when I take the scope apart, I'll find that the feet are busted on the inside. There's only a couple of tabs holding them in place. And hopefully the sensitive components in there weren't damaged. Most of the parts in a TDS scope are pretty much bulletproof, but there are some hybrid parts that are made out of thin ceramic that are very easily damaged. If they're hit just right, they shatter. Okay, I'm in the new hobby room, in case you're wondering. No desk there yet. Got something else compensating on my actual workstation, but I thought I'd turn this thing on and just see what it does. Rear power. Oop, trying to start, doesn't quite start. Something's burning out on it. So much for it coming out of a working environment. It's not powering on. The fact that it started powering on with me working the back button but not the front button tells me that the last time that it was powered on, it was just simply unplugged or turned off, probably for that very reason. Power supply issues are sometimes good problems to have, probably not in this case because this thing's so beat up. But a lot of times when power supplies go out on scopes, they're obviously just set aside, and sometimes power supplies do go out very early on in a scope's life, and so you fix the power supply, you have essentially a new scope. I don't think that's really the case in this one. This one's been pretty beat up. But there's definitely a power supply issue with this thing, or it wouldn't be doing that. Sometimes you can luck out and the fan is a 24-volt fan. Sometimes it'll turn out that the fan wire is pinched between the case, the outer case shell, and the inner frame. I've had that before where it shorts out, but there's probably a power supply issue with this thing. Who knows what the condition of the rest of the scope is. They said they turned it on to power on. That's all the further testing they did. Out of curiosity, if we turn it on, I guess if you take a picture right at the right time for the ad, makes sense that when they did the picture for the ad for this as a parts machine, they only showed this section of the scope. That's because there was probably nothing to see over here. I guess this is an instant where that 98% feedback is the tilting tail. Should have paid attention, but for me it's not really an issue. I could get it going if I wanted.